A very warm welcome to everyone. Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you might be, or middle of the night if you're unfortunate. And welcome to the 9th seminar in the International Interdisciplinary PhD in Progress weekly seminar series, Phase 4, which is organised by the Global South Network. And I'd like to start by thanking the organiser of the series, who's Dr. Noman Rayat, who's joining us obviously again today, who's a lecturer in law at Leicester Law School in the UK and is the founder and convener of the Global South Network. I'm Rhona Smith and I'm a professor in international human rights at Newcastle University, also in the UK, and I'll be chairing today's session. So I've worked in various different universities in the UK. I've also worked quite a lot in ASEAN states, particularly in Cambodia when I served as a UN Special Rapporteur. So I'm very interested in the paper that we're going to be looking at later today. And most of my work tends to be around human rights and embarking on some elements of constitutionalism too. I'm joined today by Dr. Moohyung Cho, who is the discussant for today's session. He's Assistant Professor at the School of Political Science and International Relations in Ewha Womyn University, Korea. And he received his PhD in Political Science at Duke University in the USA in 2020, with a specialisation in comparative politics and political institutions. And his research and teaching interests include comparative political institutions, judicial politics, autocracy and democracy, and the political economy of institutions. And Noman, Moohyung and I co-edited a book looking at a lot of these issues with some papers from ASEAN, which got published this is now March, it got published in January. So this is all very topical for all of us. We are also fortunate today to have a peer commentator who is Rashidah Abdul Hamid, who's a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Law in the University of Cambridge in the UK. Her PhD project looks at the role of constitutional identity as a basis for limits on constitutional amendments, specifically in the development of the basic structure doctrine in Malaysia. And Rashidah is also a managing editor of the Cambridge Law Review for the last academic year, or 2 academic years, and a student fellow at the Faculty of Law in the University of Malaya in Malaysia. And her research interests are in constitutional theory, comparative constitutional law, public law, legal pluralism, and the Malaysian legal system. And last, but definitely most important, we have our guest speaker for today's session, and it's Taehyeon Kim, who's a qualified lawyer in New York, USA, and currently a doctoral candidate in law at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, so very close to where I am in the UK. And she holds an LLB honours from Griffith College, Dublin in Ireland, and an LLM in Human Rights Law from University College London, where her dissertation focused on a critique and prospects of the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration. That would be very interesting to examine for sure. Her doctoral research explores the institutionalisation of regional human rights courts within ASEAN constitutionalism, alongside a theoretical analysis of Western and Asian Constitutionalism, incorporating normative aspects of liberalism and communitarianism. She's been engaged in human rights activities as a legal counsellor and a researcher in South Korea, advocating on behalf of human rights victims. And I should say, when I keep saying ASEAN, it's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Sorry, I just realised I kept saying that. I didn't maybe clarify what it was. My apologies. I'm so used to the word. So, Taehyeon, you have about half an hour to 35 minutes for your presentation, and we then have comments, observations and questions from the discussant and the peer commentator, and then we'll open the floor also to everyone else that we're fortunate enough to have joining us today. So Taehyeon, the floor, or rather the screen, is now yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair, for the kind introduction. And also, I'd like to thank Dr. Norman for inviting me to this seminar to discuss my work. So today, the name is quite like a new name, the nativization. Actually, I can't find this word in the dictionary as well. So I developed this concept of nativizing rights constitutionalism as an alternative framework to understand how rights constitutionalism has evolved in ASEAN states. Today's presentation, I don't analyze each ASEAN state's constitutionalism issue. I'm talking about the broad concept of what is the nativizing rights constitutionalism and why I start to develop this concept of nativization. So the aim of nativizing rights constitutionalism is to guide the future of human rights mechanism in ASEAN states. But actually, I'd like to mention this first. My PhD project is how to suggest to establish the Asian Court of Human Rights, especially within ASEAN region, because as in Asia is the only continent which doesn't have any regional human rights court, compared with other regions like the European Court of Human Rights, Inter-American Court of Human Rights, African Court of Human Rights. There are, but Asia, there is the only region which doesn't have the kind of regional court of human rights. When I have the research of why this region is the only region that of sense of the regional court of human rights, and all the existing account conclude as a political science perspective, because this region doesn't comply with the democracy. This region usually authoritarian tendency. The kind of reason is the basic reason, and just hoping that there must be kind of a balanced approach to adapt something, the regional, something like a liberal human rights framework, and also something other kind of human rights framework within this region. And I was thinking, what is the balance? So that's why I started to develop this nativizing rights constitutionalism. So as I mentioned again, the aim of this nativizing constitutionalism is to guide the future of human rights mechanism within ASEAN, especially when it comes to establishing a regional human rights court, because I want to suggest some alternative theoretical framework as the positive way to support for the establishment of the kind of a regional human rights court within the ASEAN. So before we talk about what is the concept of nativizing rights constitutionalism, it is important to first look at the history of constitutional discussions, particularly since the post-war era, to understand the challenge in ASEAN's rights framework. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't use the slides. Yeah, this is the ASEAN region. Now I'm talking about ASEAN region as individual member states, not like as a whole, the regional ASEAN. So let's talk about the post-war discourse on rights constitutionalism. In modern legal framework, the constitutionalism elevates human rights as a key principle higher constitutional norm that both limit and empower government, ensuring the justice and human dignity to achieve within a society. So, since the post-war era, particularly the end of the Cold War, the right constitutionalism has persistently marked by tension arising from ethical conflicts over competing views on human rights norms and the role of good government. So within this contestation, the hegemonic paradigm of rights constitutionalism, especially aligned with the liberal human rights norms, framing them as a liberal universalism. This liberal universalism, heavily influenced by American and French constitutional revolution with the Enlightenment principles of Lockean social contract and the Kantian deontological human agents, the Western notion of liberal rights constitutionalism is centered on upholding idealized conception of secularism and individual autonomy and rationality as the primary basis for defining human dignity and justice. So, maximizing respect for individuals' rational capacity to choose their conception of the good life, the liberal institution mandates state authority to be neutral with the judicial oversight, serving as a mechanism to review its overreach. However, in ASEAN, the discourse on rights constitutionalism in ASEAN region is a formidable counterpoint to this liberal-oriented constitutional governance. The antagonistic view on liberal rights constitutionalism is centered on the normative good theorized by ASEAN value, which was the controversial debates like early 1990s. ASEAN value thesis finding meaning from ethnicity, culture, tradition, and religion. And this Asian value, the principle of Asian value underpins the shared understanding of Asian value, which accord primacy to the promotion of virtue, drawing from traditionally and religiously grounded conception of the good that emphasizes the communal over individualistic idea. So as a result, rights constitutionalism in ASEAN states does not prioritize the individual notion of the good. However, the community serves as the foundation of recognizing rights. The state, in this framework, the state cannot be neutral. State is entrusted with advocating its version of justice and upholding dignity through the theory of common good, which seeks to foster the social harmony between the private rights and the community interest for the benefit of society as a whole. So the main conflict principle between the liberal universalism and the cultural particularity is the individualized good versus the community good, and also neutral state versus non-neutral state. That is the main point when we're talking about the human rights and the constitutionalism. So from liberal perspective, the ASEAN vision of rights constitutionalism has been framed as nativism. What I call the nativism here, that because they saw the Asian vision of rights constitutionalism vehemently reject globalized practices of liberal rights, justice, and good governance. Usually the term nativism constitute a broad political ideology talking about something, the cultural essentialism of rights constitutionalism. So, but when you think about the nativism, within the extreme nativist approach to rights constitutionalism, it is true that it tends to very static and describing a fixed static and fixed between the local identity norms and external systemic norms. And this perspective highlights how deeply rooted domestic identity might hinder the learning from broader and external norm. But however, this liberal critics point out only the, what I mentioned the first time, only the political science like a perspective that talking about how this ASEAN states was centered on the state-driven governance, that less judicial centrism practiced instead of focusing on the institutional and then, instead of focusing on the influence of cultural values and traditional norms and the historical narrative and the national identity in shaping the constitutional system. Now, I'd like talking about what was the problematic of this existing criticism from the liberal perspective of like, rights constitutionalism in ASEAN. The first problem is that empirical problem. What is the empirical problem? Empirically, the reliance of a single hegemonic model, one that is code-centric and rights-oriented, creates a methodological flow in assessing constitutional practice across the different jurisdictions. This approach assumes that the liberal constitutionalism is a definitive form of constitutionalism, leading to the misleading conclusion when analyzing countries that do not conform this model. The scholars applying this framework to cases such as, like, for example, Singapore and Malaysia, often concludes that the constitutionalism is absent or deficient simply because this system deviates from the liberal paradigm. So this analytical fallacy resulted in an exclusive discourse that fails to recognize rights constitutionalism as a historically and then culturally contingent phenomenon. As critics have pointed out, this methodological limitation has led scholars to invent categories such as authoritarian constitutionalism, not because this system lacks a constitutional order, but because they do not fit within the dominant theoretical structure of the liberal universalism. And the second problematic point in existing liberal critics is that the normative problem. This normative problem centers around the ethical dilemma of applying a singular cultural and historical conception of rights constitutionalism universally, while neglecting the other trajectory of constitutionalism. This issue arises from focusing on what ought to be rather than what is, because there is something, the judgment, the normative judgment, what ought to be within the liberal criticism, so leading to a simply good or bad dichotomy in constitutional analysis. So the ethical contradiction lies in applying a singular conception of constitutionalism based on Western tradition, like, for example, the Western tradition rooted in Greek and Roman political thought as the universal standard, while disregarding the other tradition. So if we recognize the Western tradition of like a political tradition and rights constitutionalism tradition are foundational to the development of liberal rights constitutionalism, it follows that the constitutional framework informed by the historical and the value of ASEAN states should be afforded similar recognition. In this sense, we must grant discursive equality to diverse constitutional traditions rather than just mismeasuring or like systems against single and Western-centered standard. So what I analyzed from this criticism is that liberal constitutionalism is the one of the conception of the constitutional model is not the concept. The concept of constitutionalism refers to the general idea of structured legal order, while the conception is the specific interpretation of how that order is realized in the practice. So liberal constitutionalism is liberal rights constitutionalism is one of the conception, not the concept. So there is another conception of rights constitutionalism we need to analyze, and then we can equally compare what is the difference between. So given these problems, the question arises that what alternative framework can adequately capture the evolution of rights constitutionalism in ASEAN without falling into the extreme of nativism or the universalist hegemony? So, yeah, that was the question. Yeah. So once these problems of existing accounts on rights constitutionalism are accepted, the question as to what we said, what is another alternative conception of rights constitutionalism we should consider? And the answer to this question is the Nativizing Rights Constitutionalism that I developed it. It's particularly for the ASEAN states. So now we are starting what is the Nativizing Rights Constitutionalism. So Nativizing Rights Constitutionalism refers to the normative adaptation of external norms, i.e. the liberal human rights norms, into the local constitutional framework tailored to fit the cultural, social, and historical context of specific regions, particularly in the ASEAN states. It integrates liberal human rights norms while acknowledging the distinctiveness of ASEAN, which is characterized by rich tapestry of ethnicity and culture and religion. So Nativizing rights constitutionalism does not reject liberal norms, but instead adopts them, ensuring their relevance and legitimacy within the local context. It is so Nativizing rights constitutionalism is not a wholesale replication of Western liberal rights jurisprudence, but rather syncretic process that blends external norms with the local tradition to form a contextually appropriate constitutional framework. So this framework reflects ASEAN's real constitutional the practice of prioritizing values that resonate with the shared communal experiences and the reality of the people, thereby enhancing the legitimacy and the relevancy of the governance system. So there are tools underpinning the foundational dimension underpinning the Nativizing rights constitutionalism. The first dimension is the ontological dimension as cognitive prior. So we should analyze what is the pre-existing the cognitive prior in the ASEAN region. We should know this, what is the pre-existing cultural identity and values norm. So why this pre-existing value still deeply rooted in the constitutional order in the ASEAN region. So Nativizing rights constitutionalism is grounded ontological premise that the constitutional traditions are shaped by deeply rooted cognitive prior, which structures the interaction between the existing normative frameworks and the external human rights norm. So what is the cognitive prior? So constitutional morality in the ASEAN context is centered around duty-based human flourishing, where individuals' moral responsibilities are linked to their roles in society and the pursuit of the common good. So instead of viewing the rights as the ontological perspective, the ASEAN approach sees the rights and responsibility as relational, where the personal fulfillment comes through the contributing to collective well-being. So this is what I'm talking about. What is the cognitive prior, the pre-existing, the cultural value within the ASEAN context. So while these values may reflect universal principle in theory, their expression is shaped by the local specific, ensuring that the governance structure align with the communal interest and the social cohesion. Therefore, in this context, the constitutional order oriented toward the common good and then communal interest preservation can't remain neutral regarding the end of politics and law. So when fostering the collective well-being, there is a differential respect for the governing authorities committed to the virtuous leadership, ensuring the preservation of religious identity and the social cohesion and peace. So the legitimacy of the governance is often linked to the moral qualities such as benevolence and righteousness in Confucianism and the 10 virtues of the rule. I'm difficult to pronounce this, the Buddhist words, the Dasaraja Dharma in the Buddhist tradition rather than strict institutional check. So while this concept of virtuous self-rule is traditionally appealing within the ASEAN states, of course, it lacks a clear mechanism to constrain the state authority. Like, for example, in Singapore, in the current constitutional order, constitutional framework, constitutional practice, the government's accountability checks are ensured through the politics rather than the judicial procedural mechanism, because in the Singapore, the judicial mechanism, especially the judicial review as the secondary, because Singapore's constitutional framework is operated more the political constitutionalism rather than the legal constitutionalism. And so, in other words, when arising right claim between the individual and the state, the cultural predisposition towards communal consensus prepares to accommodate the competing interest through the substantive governance without resorting the aggressive, the legalistic method to maintain the integrity and the cohesion of the established social organism, which does not conform to the liberal norms of judicial customary practice. This is the well-ordered hierarchical society. Individuals may not identify with the autonomy of self as conceived in the Western liberal individual framework. Instead, individuals are seen as part of a collective organism expected to adhere to the ethical code and fulfill their roles within the social and the religious hierarchy, thereby promoting the harmony and the common good and the peace within the society. This normative orientation is deeply rooted within the society, shaping individuals' experience through their socio-cultural context. So to keep this peace and harmony, the state cannot be neutral. This is the cognitive prior within the ASEAN. And the second dimension of the nativizing rights constitutionalism is the practical reasoning as the contextual syncretism. This contextual syncretism serves as the practical manifestation of nativization, ensuring that the integration of external norms does not override or disregard local identity and practice. In other words, external norms or the concept are integrated into the legal tradition, but not by force, but through the careful reasoning, practical reasoning about what is meaningful within the specific context. So one of the significant aspects of context syncretism is the post-colonial restoration of native value during the decolonization era, where the modern constitutional framework incorporates, because the modern constitutional framework in the ASEAN region, ASEAN states, incorporates pre-colonial cultural legitimacy. What I'm saying, pre-colonial cultural legitimacy, which means that the cognitive prior. So this process enables states to retain their historical identity while aligning with the contemporary governing structure. So, as we know, during the constitutional design period in the decolonization period, the constitutions in ASEAN region, except for the absolute theocratic Islamic constitution of Brunei, all the constitutions have the colonial legacy from their previously colonized by their colonial ruler. So their constitutional political structure is like a Westminster model political structure, or other, for example, in Indonesia, it's like a presidential structure, which all from the Western style of the political structure. And also the constitutional framework also borrowed from the Western style of the constitutional framework, based on the Lockean, the social contract, and also the Montesquieu's, the separation of power. But however, the ASEAN constitution, they also, how can I say, they also established their the communal, their how can I say, their prior identity within their constitution, even within their modern constitutional framework. For example, in Indonesia, the Pancasila was the Indonesian identity, which is emphasized the unity of Indonesian people through the 5 guiding principles rooted in the local and the cultural, the value, and then also the Brunei's Islamic value into the constitutional framework. In the Malaysia's value is the national unity by upholding the shared cultural value, including the belief in God, the loyalty to the king and the country, and the respect for the constitution, and also Singapore as the shared value, which aimed to create a sense of national identity and cohesion, drawing both traditional and modern principles to maintain the social harmony and peace. The first two, the national identity enshrined in the constitution, and the Malaysia and Singapore, this is worked as a soft constitutional law. It was not in the constitutional text, but there is the, for example, in Singapore's shared value, the executive issued document called the shared value, operating as a second and soft constitutional document. And so the interaction between the constitutional norms and the legitimate form is, however, shaped by their competing priority in upholding rights that are delineating form of the communitarian social contract within the ASEAN states, and with also the modern framework of constitutional order and also human rights, the practice. So I want to skip this the second the aspect of the practical reasoning, because in ASEAN region it's really highly multicultural and the multi-ethnic, the multi-traditional region. So there is hugely conflict between the religious pluralism and the cultural sensitivity within the secular governance. So in Singapore and Malaysia or the main ASEAN states, their constitutional framework is secular, but they, for example, in Malaysia, the Islam is the state of the religion in the constitution under the secular governance. This is another aspect of Nativizing Rights Constitutionalism, that both the blend of the liberal constitutional framework and the cultural and the traditional value of the regional identity. So based on this, I'd like to make the final reflection is that reason for, I think I couldn't adequately explain what is Nativizing Rights Constitutionalism now, but the reason for developing these rights, the concept of nativizing rights constitutionalism, is that there is a need for a more context-sensitive understanding of rights constitutionalism, one that takes into account the diverse cultural, historical, and the social context within the ASEAN states. And also this work is analogical rather than the normative articulation, engaging in with the ontological pluralism and aiming to mitigate epistemic oppression by recognizing and respecting diverse ways of knowing and understanding rights constitutionalism within ASEAN region. And the third one is that I'd like to explore the positive possibility when analyzing nativizing rights constitutionalism. It is not just only the rejection of the liberal human rights norm. There sort of harmonization between the external norms and the cultural identity and the value within the ASEAN constitutional framework. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will now pass over to our commentators. So first I could go to our discussant, Dr. Moohyung Cho, for about 5 minutes of comments, reflections, or any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, thank you first for inviting me to serve as a discussant, and then thank you, Taehyeon, for your nice presentation. And I'm personally glad to see the Korean scholar in this GSM. This might be the first time. So yeah, basically I am a political scientist, not a legal scholar. So my comment may be from the political scientist perspective. And then basically I agree with your basic idea about nativizing NRC. Because we all know that the Western ideas and Western norms are not a panacea. Particularly in the non-Western context. So many scholars and practitioners pointed out that some exporting or transplanting Western-based norms with little consideration of local conditions may result in the failure. So in that sense, we need to localize or domesticate or tailor some global or Western-based norms into the local context. So you basically pointed out such a thing, and I totally agree with such an argument. And also such an argument has some a universal appeal, because your argument may not be restricted only into the Southeast Asian region. So many other so-called global South regions may suffer from the same issue. So the NRC argument can be extended beyond the Southeast Asian region and can be applied to the other non-Western regions. So basically I think that your argument makes sense and it sounds like the convincing and plausible. The issue is practicality. So let me point out two things for you to consider. The one is the first thing is that basically you emphasize some blending, the local things and the global, like the liberal norms, constitutionalism. I was wondering if they are mingled well. They are mingled well and harmoniously with little conflicts. So, you already pointed out Asian values, and then I also remind that your presentation also reminded me of the Asian values debate in the 1990s. And then basically the Asian values emphasize the collectivism or the social harmony, and then those norms are inherently potentially in conflict with the Western-based liberal democratic norms. So, you emphasize that these two things need to be like integrated well, and then given the potential, like the antagonistic nature between these two, I'm a little bit unsure of whether they can be like integrated harmoniously. And relatedly, if they are able to be mingled well, how they can be mingled is also important consideration. So I think that these two factors, I think you need to like set up some of the relative weight or priority. So on the one hand, you may emphasize that you want to like embrace the liberal norms or liberal constitutionalism on the ground of the ASEAN's distinctive unique like aspects. Or on the other hand, you may want to like you may want to stand on the global liberal constitutionalism norm and tries to embrace some unique aspect of the Asian. So between the two extremes, it's really important to set up a balance, and which stance you are more prioritizing might be an important consideration, because this may affect the different pathways of like blending these two or contrasting like norms. That was my first consideration. And the second thing is that you are emphasizing some like the regional identity of Southeast Asia and ASEAN countries, but you also pointed out a high level of heterogeneity across different Asian countries, right? So this gives me wonder. It makes me wonder whether they can be like grouped as a regional identity. Because there are many differences. There are different political history and colonial history, and also in terms of the constitutionalism, the legal origins are also quite different between many Southeast Asian countries, right? So, for example, some like the Cambodia or the former French colonies have the French civil law system, whereas the countries like Malaysia or Singapore, they have more like the British common law system, and some Muslim-based countries have also some like the Sharia law, and the Muslim religious legal traditions are also important. So different legal origins may lead to their different conceptions of like human rights, and then when you think about such a the different like the cross country variations about the discourse about like the human rights, I was wondering if such like the differences can be like overcome by creating the NRC framework in the ASEAN states. So these are my like some take from your presentation, and then you may know this better than me. So just think about this as like some like the novices like the comments or the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Moohyung.
We'll
move on to Rashidah, if we may, for peer commentator. And can I also remind everybody who's joining us, if you have any questions, comments, observations, reflections, please do consider it and then either enter them into the chat, or once we finish, we'll take some round the room. So I'll ask anybody to raise their hand after Rashidah. So if I can move on to Rashidah, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Taehyeon, for your very enlightening presentation. I learned a lot from it. I have a few comments, and the first one is quite related to what the discussant has already raised, which is what you talked about, the harmonization of external norms and, I suppose, native traditions, in your words. And you said that this I suppose, is basically involves an adaptation of external norms into local context. And I would just like some clarification on what exactly this adaptation, what form does it take? Is it in the way that the language used by courts to justify the applicability of external norms, or is it in a more political way, in the sense that you envisage a modification of these external norms so that these norms take on a more native facade and less of the universal facade? Secondly, I would like to ask about your methodology, because you cited a few sources in, and I'm guessing that these sources are relied on when you try to extract the communitarian values that ASEAN constitutionalism is supposedly based on. So I think you cited Malaysia's Rukun Negara, Singaporean shared values, and the Indonesian Pancasila. So these are not exactly constitutional sources. So I was wondering, what parameters or what criteria do you rely on to decide whether a non-legal or a non-constitutional source is relevant to your research?
Yeah, as I mentioned, this is not the direct constitutional source, but this is used as a soft law, soft constitutional law within the, especially when in the rights adjudication. Like, for example, in the shared value in Singapore, and shared value means that as this Nativising Rights Constitutionalism already noted, the harmony, peace, and just harmony, social cohesion and integrity, that kind of shared value within the Singapore identity, shared value, not that. This is not the constitution, of course, but this is the executive issued document. And this document works as a soft constitutional law within the right adjudication. And then when the courts, how can I say, when the court's talking about the derogation clause, and then giving the reason why there is the public interest is important, and then court cite this shared value document. So this works as the soft law within the states. So of course it's informal soft law, not hard law, hard constitutional law. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And can you also have any comments or responses, please, Taehyeon, to Dr. Moohyung Cho's points,
yes,
please?
Yeah. Yes, of course. In ASEAN region, thank you, the Professor Cho. I'm also very happy to see the Korean professor here. And then thank you for the insightful and valuable the comments for me. That is true. Analyzing ASEAN regions, 10 different states, different value actually, and different historical background, different colonial legacy. So it is very difficult to make integrate within the one group, But what I said, ASEAN region exemplified like a really, really rich, different, historical background, cultural, religious diversity, and then reflected in the long-standing native tradition, and also, in Philippines and the other region in Indonesia, small indigenous, the culture and then tradition, more than 10,000, small island exist in Philippine territory. Yeah, it's a different tradition, native tradition, but. What I say different, despite this diversity, a common set of principles underpinning the shared understanding of ASEAN value, I can during my research, is that basically compare with the Western value. So unlike the Western focus on the maximizing autonomy and the rationalism in the rights constitutionalism. The traditions in the ASEAN states emphasize is more peace and then harmony and basically common good. Yeah. So this is the different characteristic from the Western liberal, the human rights things. And also, I also want to mention this one about the common good. Common good is the, individual good, individual good versus common good. So individual good, when you say the liberal universalism, the common good is the cultural particularism. This is the classic dichotomy within the constitutional and the political, the literature. But the common good is the universal value, actually. And the liberal states also the pursue the common good. Of course, the prioritization is different. Prioritization is individual, individual autonomy is the more the prioritization. But common good is the universal value recognized in every global tradition of law and the politics. Yeah. So I want to emphasize when the society pursues the common good is the illiberal and then it's the authoritarian. I think this is like a force. This is the misreading in the current existing the account. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. May I now open the conversation to anyone else who'd like to contribute any questions, comments, reflections? If you can just raise your hand or put on your camera and wave, equally fine. If anybody's got any other questions? Just checking. Nope. Don't think anybody else has got any other questions at the moment. Okay, we're almost out of time anyway, so I guess I might have to refrain from asking questions, but it's certainly been a very interesting presentation. So thank you very much indeed, Taehyeon. It's something, as I said, that all three of us, both me as chair, plus Dr. Cho and Rashidah, it's all things that we work in, and we've done a lot of research and have a lot of interest in. So thank you very much indeed for bringing together such a kind of disparate region in many ways, and trying to identify the commonality and try and work out some of the responses to human rights. I have to say, some of your arguments I have heard direct from the mouths of prime ministers and senior leaders all over ASEAN, I have to say. So it's certainly something that's very topical. So Thank you very much for a very interesting and very insightful presentation. It certainly highlighted a lot of very topical issues at the moment within Southeast Asia. I hopefully will have an opportunity at some point to see some of your work or your PhD, because it certainly is very interesting to me. Thank you very much also to Dr. Moohyung Cho and to Rashidah Abdul Hamid. We are grateful for your comments and your insights for us today, so thank you very much indeed. And thank you also to everyone who did attend and who's been able to benefit from Taehyung's knowledge and expertise. The Global South Network warmly welcomes PhD students from any discipline and from any part of the world to share their projects and receive feedback. It's often very interdisciplinary. If you do know anyone who might be interested, please do spread the word, and they can contact Dr. Noman Rayat for further information, and the email is provided in the chat box, or it will be. I think he's switched off, so I'll add it into the chat box. Oh no, he's still there. I'll add it into the chat box. So as we've got it, oh, there we go, right. There's one we prepared earlier, so that's us ready. Our next seminar is scheduled for the 12th of March, so it's the same time, the same web links, next week from 3 to 4 UK time, and further details will be communicated in due course. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much indeed, Taehyeon, and amazingly, we're going to actually finish on time. So thank you very much to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, or get some sleep for those that it's very late in the day, like in Korea. So hopefully you'll get to sleep soon, Moohyung. Thank you very much for all your time.
1 a.m. here.
Oh my gosh! I knew it was terribly late, but 1 a.m. Oh my gosh! Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I do look forward to hearing and seeing how you proceed with your research, Taehyeon. Thank you, everybody. Good night to Moohyung, and enjoy the rest of your day to everybody else. Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.